The alarm clock barely had a chance to sound at 5:15 a.m. before Maya Patel silenced it. She had been awake for nearly 30 minutes already, her mind racing with solutions to problems her colleagues didn't yet know existed. Her internal clock remained calibrated to a rhythm carved by years of analyzing data that others overlooked, seeing patterns that most would miss until it was too late. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maya's apartment sat 15 minutes from Horizon Technologies. Gleaming headquarters, a modest one-bedroom that betrayed nothing of her brilliance. Inside, everything followed a system of perfect organization. Books arranged by subject and frequency of reference. Kitchen tools placed for maximum efficiency. A whiteboard filled with equations and flowcharts that would baffle most of her coworkers. The simplicity of her living space reflected someone who understood that true innovation came from clarity, not complexity. Maya performed her morning ritual with practiced precision, 20 minutes of yoga to center her mind, a shower timed to exactly 7 minutes, and a breakfast of steel-cut oats with precisely measured berries and honey. By the time she arrived at Horizon's campus, the early morning light was just beginning to illuminate the modern glass and steel structure. Other employees wouldn't arrive for another hour, but Maya preferred the quiet of dawn when the building hummed with potential rather than distraction. Her colleagues knew her as the data wizard, the analyst who could extract insights from numbers that seemed random to everyone else. She would stare at spreadsheets and market trends until patterns emerged like constellations forming from scattered stars. When she identified a solution, she didn't announce it with fanfare. She simply documented her findings in meticulous reports that often went unread by the executives who could implement them. During lunch, while others gathered in the cafeteria to discuss weekend plans or office politics, Maya sat alone with research papers and industry analyses spread before her. Those who glanced over her shoulder noticed that she read at a pace that seemed impossible, absorbing complex information that would take others hours to process. Just keeping current, she would say when asked, but never explained how a mid-level analyst had developed such comprehensive knowledge of global markets, competitive strategies, and emerging technologies across multiple industries. Young analysts sometimes sought her guidance, drawn to her quiet expertise despite her reputation for keeping to herself. "Look at this trend here," she would say, pointing to a seemingly insignificant data point. "When you see this pattern repeat across 3 quarters, it signals a market shift that most will miss until it's already happened." They wondered how she knew things that senior strategists with decades of experience often overlooked, but she deflected their questions with modest smiles and weather observations. Raj Mehta, a new hire in the analytics department, once asked her directly where she had learned to see patterns so clearly. "Experience and attention," she answered. "Eyes focused somewhere beyond the office walls. You start to notice things when you truly pay attention." The small scar on her right temple was barely noticeable most days. She kept it partially covered with her hair, a reminder of a car accident that had nearly taken her life 5 years earlier. "Just a reminder to drive carefully," she would say if anyone asked. But the accident had changed her in ways few understood, rewiring her brain to see connections that remained invisible to others. Then there were the other things, the way she instinctively noted every exit when entering a room, how she maintained awareness of everyone around her, the subtle flinch when startled by unexpected sounds. The company psychologist would have recognized these as signs of hypervigilance, but Maya had never visited the company psychologist. She managed her anxiety the same way she managed data, with methodical precision and quiet determination. It was the notebook that raised the most questions, though few had seen its contents. The small leather-bound journal went everywhere with her, filled with handwritten notes in a shorthand only she could decipher. Once, when she'd stepped away from her desk, Raj had glimpsed a page of intricate diagrams and calculations that seemed to predict market movements with uncanny precision. "Personal project," she explained when she caught him looking. "Just a system I'm developing." The truth was both simpler and more complex. The notebook contained the strategy that could save Horizon Technologies from a catastrophe that Maya alone had foreseen. Every night she updated her projections, tracking how the market was shifting, noting the subtle indicators that Horizon's current strategy was heading toward disaster. In the mirror, she sometimes caught herself looking haggard, dark circles forming under her eyes as she pushed herself to find solutions while maintaining her day-to-day responsibilities. The announcement of the executive strategy meeting sent ripples of excitement through the company. Horizon was losing ground too. Competitors and rumors of layoffs had begun to circulate. CEO Victor Reynolds had called together his leadership team to chart a new course that would determine the company's future. Maya requested to attend the meeting, citing analyses she had developed that predicted serious threats to their current business model. Her direct supervisor, Director Sarah Chun, shook her head. "I'm sorry, Maya. This is senior leadership only. I'll be sure to represent our department's viewpoints." She tried explaining the urgency, offering to prepare a brief presentation that would take no more than 10 minutes, volunteering to simply observe if speaking wasn't an option. But the hierarchy was clear, and Maya Patel, despite her insights, was not considered essential to strategic discussions. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The morning of the meeting, Maya arrived even earlier than usual. She checked her projections one final time, confirming what she already knew. Horizon was 3/4 away from a competitive crisis that would threaten everything they had built. She had identified not just the problem, but a potential solution that would require bold action and a complete pivot in their approach to the market. When someone showed her the attendee list for the strategy meeting, her face remained impassive, but her hand tightened around her notebook. Every name represented someone with power to change the company's direction, and not one of them had seen the complete picture she had assembled. Something in that list of names had triggered a familiar feeling, the same sensation she had experienced just before her accident, the certainty that something disastrous was approaching and that she alone could see it coming. The strategy meeting was scheduled to begin, and Maya Patel, who had predicted both the problem and its solution, found herself wondering if Horizon could survive what was coming. As the executives filed into the glass-walled conference room, Maya returned to her desk, opened her computer, and began to work. If she couldn't be in the meeting, she would do the next best thing, prepare for the aftermath when her predictions came true. Victor Reynolds entered the conference room like a general preparing for battle. His tailored suit and commanding presence set the tone for what everyone knew would be a difficult conversation. At 57, Reynolds had built Horizon Technologies from a promising startup into a mid-sized player in enterprise software. Now, for the first time in the company's 15-year history, they were losing market share at an alarming rate. "I don't need to tell any of you how serious our situation is," Reynolds began, his voice carrying the weight of sleepless nights. "Our last 2 quarters have been disappointing, and preliminary data for this quarter suggests the trend is accelerating." Around the polished mahogany table sat Horizon's leadership team: Chief Financial Officer Diane Williams, Chief Technology Officer James Park, Chief Marketing Officer Lucas Bennett, and 6 division directors including Sarah Chun. Their expressions ranged from grim determination to barely concealed anxiety. "We've gathered every department's recommendations," Reynolds continued, gesturing to the stack of reports before him. "I want solutions, not excuses. Our investors are getting nervous, and we need to show them a clear path forward." For the next 2 hours, the room became a battlefield of competing ideas. The marketing team proposed increased spending on brand awareness. The technology division wanted to accelerate their development timeline for features that competitors already offered. The financial team suggested cost-cutting measures, including possible staff reductions. Sarah Chun listened to the increasingly fragmented discussion with growing concern. None of the proposals addressed the fundamental shifts in the market that her analyst, Maya Patel, had been tracking for months. When she finally spoke, her voice cut through the debate like a blade. "Before we commit to any direction, I think we should consider some data my team has been analyzing." She hesitated, then added, "Specifically, some patterns that Maya Patel has identified." Reynolds frowned. "Patel, the analyst? What could she possibly see that our strategy team hasn't already considered?" Sarah opened the folder she had brought, revealing printouts of Maya's analysis. Maya has been tracking some concerning patterns across multiple data sets. She believes, and I'm inclined to agree, that we're not just facing a temporary downturn. The entire market is shifting in ways that make our current business model unsustainable. The room fell silent as Sarah distributed copies of Maya's analysis. The pages contained dense charts and projections that painted a stark picture of Horizon's future if they maintained their current trajectory. "This can't be right," Lucas Bennett said, scanning the projections with growing alarm. "These numbers suggest we'll lose 30% of our customer base within a year." James Park studied the technical analysis more carefully. "These adoption curves, they're showing a massive shift toward integrated solutions rather than standalone products like ours." He looked up, his expression troubled. "If this is accurate, our entire product strategy is obsolete." "Who is this analyst again?" Reynolds asked, his voice quieter now, the dismissiveness replaced by something approaching respect as he studied the data before him. "Maya Patel," Sarah replied. "She's been with us for 3 years. Before that, she worked at Cambridge Analytics and did some consulting work. She has an uncanny ability to see patterns in data that others miss." "And does this Maya have any suggestions?" Reynolds asked. "Or is she just predicting our demise?" Sarah hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out Maya's leather notebook. "She gave me this before the meeting. Said if you were interested in solutions, everything you need is in here." Reynolds took the notebook with skeptical curiosity. Opening it revealed pages of handwritten notes, diagrams, and calculations that at first glance seemed impenetrable. But as he turned the pages, a coherent strategy began to emerge, one so fundamentally different from Horizon's current approach that it took his breath away. "This isn't an adjustment to our current strategy," he said finally. "This is a complete reimagining of our business model." "Yes," Sarah agreed. "Maya believes we need to stop competing in a market we're losing and create an entirely new category. Instead, she's mapped out not just the concept, but the implementation plan, resource requirements, and projected outcomes." For the next hour, the leadership team pored over Maya's notebook, asking questions that Sarah couldn't fully answer. Finally, Reynolds closed the notebook and looked around the table. "Get her in here," he said. "I want to hear this directly from the source." When the call came, Maya was deep in code, developing a prototype that aligned with the strategy she doubted would ever be implemented. She followed Sarah's assistant to the conference room, aware of the curious glances from colleagues who rarely saw her venture near the executive floor. The conference room fell silent as she entered. 8 pairs of eyes studied her with expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism to outright hostility. Her notebook sat open in the center of the table like evidence at a trial. "Miss Patel," Reynolds began, his voice carefully neutral, "your director has shared some interesting analyses with us. I'd like you to explain how you arrived at these conclusions and why you believe your proposed strategy is our best path forward." Maya took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her knowledge press against her chest. This moment, standing before people who had never sought her input, who had excluded her from the very discussion that would determine the company's fate, crystallized everything that had defined her career. Always the observer, never the decision maker. Always the analyst, never the strategist. Always the one who saw what was coming, but whose warnings went unheeded until it was almost too late. But something in Reynolds' expression told her that this time might be different. He was listening now, truly listening, because the data had finally become too compelling to ignore. "The market isn't just changing," she began, her voice growing stronger with each word. "It's undergoing a fundamental restructuring. Our competitors aren't winning because their products are better. They're winning because they've recognized that the product itself is no longer the central value proposition." She stepped forward and flipped to a specific page in her notebook, revealing a diagram that mapped customer needs against current market offerings. "This gap here," she said, pointing to an empty quadrant, "represents an unmet need that none of our competitors have addressed. If we pivot now, we can own this space before anyone else recognizes it exists." For the next 45 minutes, Maya Patel, who had never been invited to a strategy meeting, who had been dismissed as just another analyst, commanded the attention of Horizon's entire leadership team. She answered their questions with precision, anticipated their objections with data, and painted a vision of the future so compelling that even the most skeptical executives began to nod in agreement. When she finished, the room fell silent. Reynolds studied her with new eyes, seeing not just an analyst but a strategist whose vision might save the company he had built. "How long have you been developing this strategy?" he asked finally. 9 months, Maya replied. "Since I first noticed the pattern in our customer retention data." "And you've been working on this alone, without direction?" "Yes, it wasn't part of my assigned responsibilities." Reynolds exchanged glances with his executive team, a silent communication passing between them. Then he closed Maya's notebook and slid it back toward her. "Miss Patel, I want you to lead a task force to develop this strategy further. You'll report directly to me. We'll need a detailed implementation plan within 2 weeks." Maya felt the ground shift beneath her feet. After years of watching from the sidelines, of having her insights filtered through layers of management, she was being asked to step into the center of the very crisis she had predicted. "Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. I already have a preliminary implementation plan. And I've developed a prototype to demonstrate the core concept." Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "A prototype? On your own time?" "Yes, I believe the situation was urgent enough to warrant it." A smile, the first genuine smile anyone had seen from Reynolds in months, spread across his face. "It seems we've been underutilizing you, Miss Patel. Let's make sure that doesn't happen again." As Maya left the conference room, notebook clutched to her chest, she felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. The strategy she had developed in solitude would now be tested in the harsh light of market realities. The patterns she had identified would either prove her a visionary or reveal her as just another analyst who had overreached. Either way, she was no longer watching from the periphery. She was now at the center of Horizon's fight for survival. And the quiet analyst who had never been invited to the strategy meeting found herself holding the roadmap for the company's future. In her apartment that night, Maya cleared her whiteboard and began mapping out the implementation plan she would present to Reynolds. The strategy that had lived only in her notebook and her mind would now become Horizon's official direction. The responsibility was enormous, but for the first time in her career, Maya felt her external role aligning with her internal capabilities. As dawn broke, she realized she had worked through the night, the hours passing unnoticed as she refined her vision for Horizon's transformation. The alarm clock sounded at 5:15 a.m., but Maya Patel had been awake all along, her mind finally free to work on the problems everyone now knew existed. The task force assembled in Conference Room B had the nervous energy of soldiers preparing for battle. Maya stood at the whiteboard, marker in hand, as Horizon's newly formed future strategy team filed in. The group included hand-picked specialists from every department, people known for innovation rather than rank, talent rather than tenure. Victor Reynolds had given her unprecedented authority to select her team members, regardless of their position in the company hierarchy. Maya had chosen people she had quietly observed for years, those who questioned assumptions, who saw possibilities where others saw only problems. "Some of you might be wondering why you're here," Maya began, her voice steady despite the stakes. 2 weeks ago, I presented a strategy to the executive team that represents a fundamental shift in Horizon's approach to the market. Today, we begin implementing that strategy. She outlined the core concept. Horizon would stop competing as a product company and reposition itself as an ecosystem provider, creating a platform that would make their competitors' products more valuable rather than trying to replace them. "Our strength has always been integration," she explained, drawing a diagram that showed Horizon at the center of a network rather than as a standalone entity. "We've been fighting to own territory when we should have been building bridges between territories." Raj Mehta, the young analyst who had once glimpsed Maya's notebook, raised his hand. "This is brilliant, but aren't we essentially helping our competitors by making their products work better with each other?" Maya smiled. "That's exactly what we're doing. And in return, we become indispensable to the entire market. No one will be able to operate effectively without us." For the next hour, she detailed the implementation plan, a phased approach that would transform Horizon while maintaining enough of their current business to sustain operations during the transition. The room hummed with questions, suggestions, and a growing sense of excitement as the team began to see the vision that had lived in Maya's mind for so long. "This isn't just a pivot," said Elena Diaz, a senior developer who had been with Horizon. "Since its founding, this is a complete reinvention." "Are the executives really on board with something this radical?" "They are now," Maya replied, remembering the moment when Reynolds had first understood what she was proposing. "But making this work will require all of us to think differently about what Horizon is and what it can become." As the meeting concluded, Maya assigned initial responsibilities and set an aggressive timeline for the first phase of implementation. The team dispersed with a renewed sense of purpose, energized by a strategy that felt both revolutionary and inevitable. Maya remained in the conference room, studying her diagrams and notes. She didn't notice Victor Reynolds enter until he spoke. "Impressive," he said, gesturing toward the whiteboard covered with her vision. "Your team seems inspired." Maya turned, surprised by the CEO's presence. "They understand what's at stake. They want to be part of building something meaningful." Reynolds studied her with the calculating gaze of someone reassessing a previously overlooked asset. "You know, I reviewed your personnel file last night. Cambridge Analytics, a few years at a consulting firm, then 3 years here as a senior analyst. Nothing that suggested this." He gestured to the elaborate strategy mapped out on the board. "Sometimes perspective comes from unexpected places," Maya replied, careful to keep her tone neutral. "I've always seen patterns others miss. It's just how my mind works." "Since your accident," Reynolds said, watching her reaction carefully. Maya's hand instinctively moved toward the small scar on her temple. "You read my medical file. I read everything about you, the accident that should have killed you, the 6 months of recovery, the cognitive changes reported by your doctors." He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "They called it acquired savant syndrome. Said your brain rewired itself after the trauma, gave you abilities that are unusual." Maya felt a chill run down her spine. She had kept that diagnosis private, sharing it with no one at Horizon. "That's my personal medical history, Mr. Reynolds. It's also possibly the most valuable asset this company now has." He countered. "Your ability to see patterns, to process complex data sets and extract meaningful insights, that's not just talent, is it? It's something more." The silence between them stretched taut with unspoken implications. Maya had spent years hiding the full extent of her abilities, fearing that she would be seen as a curiosity rather than a professional. My medical history doesn't change the validity of the strategy, she said finally. The data supports it, regardless of how I process that data. Reynolds nodded slowly. Fair enough. But I want you to understand something, Miss Patel. I've bet the future of this company on your vision. If you've seen something no one else could see because of your unique perspective, I need to know everything. No more working in isolation. No more keeping insights to yourself. The demand hung in the air between them, reasonable on its face but carrying undercurrents that made Maya deeply uncomfortable. Reynolds wasn't just asking for professional transparency. He was claiming ownership of the very thing that made her different. I've always shared my professional insights when they were relevant, she said carefully. What happened to me personally is separate from my work here. Reynolds smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Nothing is separate when the stakes are this high. I need all of you, Miss Patel. Every insight, every pattern, every prediction. This company's survival depends on it. As he left, Maya felt the weight of his expectations press against her chest. She had wanted recognition, had fought to be heard, but this was something different. Reynolds now saw her not just as a strategist, but as a resource to be leveraged, a competitive advantage to be exploited. The next morning, Maya found a new workspace waiting for her, a corner office on the executive floor with glass walls that offered a panoramic view of the city. The promotion had been announced via company-wide email, along with the formation of the future strategy team under her leadership. The sudden visibility was jarring after years of working in relative anonymity. Colleagues who had barely acknowledged her existence now stopped by to offer congratulations. Senior managers who had dismissed her analyses now sought her insights. Her inbox overflowed with meeting invitations and requests for consultation. Sarah Chun visited mid-morning, leaning against the doorframe of Maya's new office with a mix of pride and concern on her face. Quite a change, she said, gesturing to the expansive space. Maya looked up from her computer, where she had been refining the technical specifications for their new platform. I asked for a larger workspace for the team. Reynolds gave me this instead. Sarah entered and closed the door behind her. Maya, I need to ask you something, and I want an honest answer. How long have you been developing this strategy? I told Reynolds 9 months. And in those 9 months, you never thought to bring it to me first? I'm your supervisor. I could have helped you refine it, present it to the right people. The hurt in Sarah's voice was evident, and Maya felt a twinge of regret. I tried, Sarah. 3 times I submitted reports highlighting the market shifts I was seeing. They came back with comments like, interesting but speculative and outside current strategic priorities. Sarah frowned. I never saw those reports. They never made it past the department review committee. After the 3rd rejection, I realized I needed more evidence, a more comprehensive strategy. So I kept working on it privately. Understanding dawned on Sarah's face. That's why you've been working such long hours. Not just doing your assigned analyses, but building this entire alternative strategy. Maya nodded. I knew what was coming. I could see it in the data. No one else was connecting the dots, so I had to do it myself. Sarah sank into one of the visitor chairs, her expression troubled. Reynolds is making a lot of promises to the board based on your strategy. He's telling them you have some kind of special insight into market patterns. She hesitated, then added, he mentioned your accident, Maya, said it gave you unique cognitive abilities. The chill returned to Maya's spine. He had no right to share that. Maybe not, but he did. And now there are expectations that no normal person could possibly meet. Sarah leaned forward, her voice dropping. He's positioning you as some kind of oracle, Maya. What happens when you can't predict everything perfectly? The question hung in the air, giving voice to the fear that had been growing in Maya's mind since her meeting with Reynolds. She had developed a strategy based on patterns she could see clearly, but no one could predict every variable, every competitor's move, every market shift. I never claimed to be infallible, Maya said. The strategy is sound based on current data and projected trends. But implementation will require constant adjustment as conditions change. Sarah stood, her expression softening. Just be careful, Maya. I've worked with Reynolds for 8 years. He builds people up when he needs them, but he can turn just as quickly if they don't deliver exactly what he wants. After Sarah left, Maya stared out at the city skyline, contemplating how quickly her professional world had transformed. She had fought so hard to be heard, to have her insights taken seriously, and now she was at the center of Horizon's most important strategic initiative. But with that recognition came expectations that went beyond professional competence. Reynolds didn't just want her work. He wanted the unique way her mind processed information, the ability that had emerged from the trauma that had nearly killed her. The first phase of implementation began with controlled disruption. Maya's team developed a software bridge that allowed competitors' products to work seamlessly with each other through Horizon's new platform. They released it as an open beta to selected customers who had been struggling with integration issues. The response was immediate and enthusiastic. Companies that had been forced to choose between competing software ecosystems suddenly found they could use best-of-breed products regardless of vendor. Horizon's platform became the connective tissue that held disparate systems together. Market analysts noted the shift with cautious optimism. Horizon Technologies appears to be pivoting away from direct competition in the crowded enterprise software market, wrote one influential industry blogger. Their new integration platform solves a pain point that no single vendor has adequately addressed. Reynolds called Maya to his office after the first wave of positive press, his mood buoyant with vindication. "The board is impressed," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "Your strategy is already gaining traction, and we've barely begun implementation." Maya nodded, accepting the praise with professional detachment. "The early adopters are responding well, but the real test will come when we approach the major players. They may see us as a threat to their walled garden strategies." Reynolds waved away her caution. "Let me worry about the politics. I want you focused on the next phase, expanding the platform capabilities and bringing more partners into the ecosystem." "My team is already working on it," Maya assured him. Changed everything. The board meeting approached like an incoming storm, dark clouds of expectation gathering on the horizon. Maya worked through nights refining the monetization strategy, pushing her team to compress months of planned development into mere weeks. The pressure created an intensity that transformed Horizon's offices, lights burning well past midnight, food delivery couriers becoming familiar faces, sleeping bags appearing under desks. 2 days before the board meeting, Maya gathered her core team for a final review. They looked exhausted but determined, bound together by the shared struggle of bringing something revolutionary into existence under impossible deadlines. "What we've accomplished in 2 weeks would normally take 2 quarters, Maya said, her own fatigue evident in the shadows beneath her eyes. "I know Reynolds has pushed us beyond reasonable limits, but what we've built here—" She gestured to the platform visualization on the large monitor. "This will change everything." Elena rubbed her eyes, leaning back in her chair. "The accelerated timeline forced us to simplify. Ironically, I think the platform is better for it, more elegant, more intuitive." Raj nodded in agreement. "The subscription model is ready. We can start charging partners for premium integration features immediately. And the user analytics show engagement levels triple what we projected," added Priya Singh, their data scientist. "People aren't just trying the platform, they're making it central to their workflows." Maya studied her team with quiet pride. They had risen to an impossible challenge, transforming themselves in the process. Raj had evolved from a curious analyst to a strategic thinker. Elena had broken free from traditional development paradigms. to create something truly innovative. Priya had discovered patterns in user behavior that refined the platform's functionality in real time. "Tomorrow we present to Reynolds," Maya said. "The day after, he takes our work to the board. Whatever happens next, remember what we've proven here, that innovation doesn't always come from the top, that sometimes the best strategy emerges from those who see what others have missed." The team dispersed, returning to their desks to make final refinements before the presentation. Maya remained in the conference room, reviewing the revenue projections one more time. The numbers were strong, stronger than she had initially predicted. But would they be enough to satisfy a board focused on quarterly results rather than long-term transformation? She was still working when Sarah Chun appeared at the door, concern evident in her expression. "You need to sleep, Maya. You can't keep pushing yourself like this." Maya looked up, blinking away the fatigue that blurred her vision. "Just need to finish these projections." Sarah entered, closing the door behind her. "I've been hearing things, Maya. Rumors about how you're driving your team, about the hours you're keeping, about the predictions you're making that keep proving unnervingly accurate. We're under pressure to deliver." "Reynolds wants—" "I know what Reynolds wants," Sarah interrupted. "He wants a miracle that saves the company and vindicates his leadership. But at what cost? Look at yourself, Maya. When was the last time you slept for more than a few hours? When was the last time you ate something that didn't come in a delivery container?" The questions hit harder than Maya expected. She had been so focused on execution, on proving her strategy correct, that she had barely noticed the physical toll it was taking. "This isn't just about the strategy anymore, is it?" Sarah asked gently. "It's about validation. Proving that you should have been in that meeting room all along." Maya stared at the projection figures on her tablet, seeing suddenly the pattern of her own behavior, the driving need to be right, to be recognized, to never again be excluded from decisions that she was uniquely qualified to make. "Maybe," she admitted, "but it's also about saving Horizon." "This strategy works, Sarah. I can see it so clearly." Sarah sat beside her, her voice softening. "I believe you. But Maya, Reynolds is telling people you're some kind of corporate oracle. The pressure he's putting on you, it's not sustainable. No one can predict the future indefinitely, not even you." The warning echoed Maya's own growing concerns. Reynolds had begun treating her less like a strategist and more like a proprietary algorithm, a black box that could be fed market data and expected to produce infallible predictions. "I never claimed to be infallible," Maya said, echoing her earlier conversation with Sarah. "I just see patterns others miss. I know. But Reynolds has convinced himself and the board that your insights are some kind of competitive superpower. What happens when you can't see the next pattern clearly, when variables emerge that no one could have predicted?" The question hung in the air, giving voice to the fear that had been growing in Maya's mind. Her ability to see connections had given Horizon a strategic advantage, but it had also created expectations that no human could consistently meet. Before she could respond, her phone chimed with a message from Reynolds. "Need to see you now." "My office." Maya exchanged a worried glance with Sarah. Late-night summons from the CEO rarely brought good news, especially the night before a crucial presentation. Reynolds was pacing when she arrived, his usual composed demeanor fracturing under visible stress. "TechCore just announced their own integration platform," he said without preamble. "They're positioning it as an authorized alternative to third-party solutions like ours." Maya nodded, processing this development against her projected timelines. "Sooner than expected, but not surprising. They've recognized the threat we pose, and they're responding by trying to own the space themselves." "The board meeting is in 36 hours, Reynolds said, his voice tight with controlled panic. "I need to walk in there with more than just we anticipated this. I need a concrete response that shows we're still ahead." "We are ahead," Maya assured him. "TechCore is announcing but they don't have a working platform yet. They're rushing. A conceptual response to counter our actual product. Their announcement is a defensive move that actually validates our strategy. Reynolds stopped pacing, studying her with that unnerving intensity that had become familiar. You're certain? This isn't just optimism? I'm certain. Their announcement follows the pattern I outlined weeks ago. They're moving to protect their territory, but they're responding to us rather than leading with innovation of their own. Something in her calm certainty seemed to reassure him. Reynolds sank into his chair, the tension in his shoulders easing. Slightly. Sometimes I forget how young you are, he said, almost to himself. 32 years old, and you see the market with more clarity than analysts who have been doing this for decades. Maya shifted uncomfortably under the scrutiny. Pattern recognition isn't about experience. It's about seeing connections that aren't immediately obvious. Since your accident, Reynolds said, returning to the topic that Maya had hoped was behind them. That's when it started, isn't it? This ability to see what others miss. Maya considered denying it, but the truth was too well documented in her medical records. Yes, the neurologist called it acquired savant syndrome. The trauma rewired neural pathways, created new connections. A gift born from tragedy, Reynolds mused. And now that gift might save Horizon Technologies. Maya bristled at the characterization. It's not a gift. It's a different way of processing information, one that happens to be valuable in certain contexts. But it doesn't make me infallible, Mr. Reynolds. I can be wrong. But you haven't been. Not about the market shifts, not about our competitors. Responses, not about the customer adoption rates of our new platform. He leaned forward, his expression intense. Do you know how rare that kind of insight is? How valuable? The conversation was veering into territory that made Maya deeply uncomfortable. The commodification of her cognitive differences, the implicit pressure to keep producing predictions that proved accurate. I should get back to preparing for tomorrow's presentation, she said, rising from her chair. The team has compressed months of development into weeks. We have a solid monetization strategy to present to the board. Reynolds nodded, his expression returning to professional composure. Of course. Get some rest, Maya. Tomorrow is an important day for all of us. But as she left his office, Maya could feel the weight of his expectations following her like a shadow. Reynolds had staked his leadership on her strategy, had positioned her as Horizon's secret weapon in the fight for market relevance. The pressure to maintain that perception was becoming its own kind of burden. Maya returned to her office to find Raj waiting, his expression troubled. We have a problem with the user authentication module, he said as soon as she entered. There's a vulnerability we didn't catch in testing. Maya set down her tablet, immediate concern displacing her fatigue. How serious? Potentially very. Under specific conditions, it could allow unauthorized access to integrated systems. We found it during final security checks. This was exactly the kind of last-minute crisis that could derail their presentation and undermine confidence in the platform. Maya moved to her computer, pulling up the authentication code to examine the vulnerability firsthand. Show me, she sighed, and Raj guided her through the specific sequence that exposed the security gap. Maya studied the code, her mind automatically tracing the patterns of data. Flow and access control. The vulnerability wasn't obvious. It emerged only when certain features interacted under specific conditions. But once identified, the solution became clear. Here, she said, pointing to a section of code. The authentication token validation needs to be recursive, checking each layer of permission independently rather than assuming the initial validation covers all subsequent access requests. Raj watched as she began modifying the code, his expression shifting from concern to fascination. How did you see that so quickly? I've been staring at this for hours. Maya continued typing, her fingers moving with practiced precision. It's a pattern I've seen before. Security vulnerabilities often hide in the transitions between systems, in the assumptions one layer makes about what another layer has already verified. Within 20 minutes, she had rewritten the authentication module, closing the vulnerability while actually improving the efficiency of the validation process. Raj reviewed her changes with growing admiration. "This is elegant," he said finally. "It doesn't just fix the problem, it makes the entire authentication system more robust." Maya nodded, satisfied with the solution but troubled by yet another example of how her unique cognitive processing set her apart from her colleagues. What had taken Raj hours of frustrated analysis had been immediately apparent to her, not because she was smarter or more experienced, but because her brain formed connections differently since the accident. "Run a full security scan on the revised code," she instructed. "We need to be absolutely certain there are no other vulnerabilities before tomorrow's presentation." As Raj left to implement the testing, Maya leaned back in her chair, the weight of fatigue suddenly pressing down on her. She had been pushing herself beyond reasonable limits, driving herself and her team to compress impossible amounts of work into abbreviated timelines. Sarah's warning echoed in her mind. "The pressure he's putting on you, it's not sustainable." And beneath that concern lurked a deeper question that Maya had been avoiding. What would happen when she inevitably failed to live up to the oracle-like expectations Reynolds had created? The presentation to Reynolds the next morning went better than anyone dared hope. The platform's accelerated monetization strategy was solid, the technical implementation was robust, and the early adoption metrics were compelling. Reynolds listened with growing enthusiasm as Maya and her team outlined how Horizon would not only survive but thrive in the new market paradigm they were helping to create. "This is exactly what the board needs to see," Reynolds said as the presentation concluded. "You've taken a theoretical pivot and turned it into a concrete business model with immediate revenue potential." The praise should have felt validating, but Maya noticed how Reynolds' attention kept returning to her rather than acknowledging the team's collective achievement. In his mind, she had become the singular source of Horizon's strategic advantage, the oracle whose insights had charted their new course. As the team dispersed to make final refinements before the board meeting, Reynolds asked Maya to remain behind. He waited until they were alone before speaking, his voice carrying an intensity that had become familiar. "There's something I need to know before tomorrow," he said, studying her with that calculating gaze. "What comes after this? If the board approves our continued investment in the platform strategy, what's the next market shift we should be preparing for?" Maya felt the weight of his expectations like a physical pressure. "Mr. Reynolds, successful implementation of the current strategy should be our focus. Trying to predict the next shift before we've fully executed this pivot would be premature." Reynolds frowned, dissatisfied with her response. "That's not what I'm asking, Maya. I need to know what you see coming. The board will want to know that we're not just reacting to current market conditions, but anticipating future opportunities." "Strategy isn't prophecy," Maya said carefully. "It's about making informed choices based on available data and remaining adaptable as conditions change." "But you see patterns others don't," Reynolds pressed. "You predicted this market shift months before anyone else recognized it. You anticipated our competitors' responses with uncanny accuracy. What else are you seeing?" The question trapped Maya in the box Reynolds had built around her abilities. He wanted certainty in an uncertain world, wanted her cognitive differences to function like a crystal ball that could eliminate the inherent risks of business strategy. "I'm seeing signals that suggest increased regulatory attention on data sovereignty," she said finally, drawing on analyses she had been conducting in parallel with the platform implementation. "Companies will need solutions that maintain compliance across jurisdictions with conflicting data governance requirements." Reynolds' expression brightened with interest. "And how do we position for that?" Our platform already includes data routing capabilities that could be expanded to include compliance management features. But that's a potential future direction, not a certainty. Reynolds nodded, clearly filing this insight away for future use. This is exactly why you're so valuable to Horizon. Maya, you don't just solve today's problems, you see tomorrow's opportunities. As Maya left his office, she felt the burden of his expectations growing heavier. Reynolds had come to rely on her not just as a strategist, but as a kind of market oracle, someone who could remove uncertainty from strategic decisions and give Horizon an almost unfair advantage over competitors who lacked similar insight. The board meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. the following day. Maya spent the evening in her apartment, reviewing her presentation materials one final time. Her small whiteboard was covered with notes and diagrams, contingency plans for various questions the board might raise. She was preparing responses to potential objections when her phone rang, an unknown number that she almost ignored until some instinct made her answer. "Is this Maya Patel?" The voice was unfamiliar male, with the careful neutrality of someone making a professional call. "Yes, who is this?" "My name is David Chun. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer at TechCore." Maya's hand tightened around the phone. TechCore, their primary competitor, the company that had just announced its own integration platform in response to Horizon strategy. "How did you get this number, Mr. Chun?" A soft chuckle came through the line. "Finding information is part of my job, Ms. Patel, much like seeing patterns is part of yours." The statement sent a chill through Maya. How much did TechCore know about her role at Horizon? About her unique cognitive abilities? "What do you want?" she asked, keeping her voice level. "To meet, to talk about your vision for integration, platforms, and how it might align with TechCore's resources and market position." The implication was clear. TechCore was making an overture, either for acquisition or recruitment. Exactly as Maya had predicted in her escalation pattern. "I'm afraid I can't discuss Horizon's strategy with competitors, Mr. Chun." "I'm not asking about Horizon's strategy," Chun replied smoothly. "I'm interested in your vision. The strategy you developed in isolation, the one Horizon is now implementing because they finally recognized what they had in you." The accuracy of his assessment was unsettling. How did he know that the strategy had originated with her? That it had been developed before Horizon's leadership recognized its value? "My work at Horizon is confidential," Maya said firmly. "I'm not interested in discussing it with TechCore or any other competitor." "Of course," Chun said, his tone suggesting he had expected this response. "But when you find yourself constrained by leadership that doesn't fully appreciate the scope of your vision, remember that there are companies that would give you the resources and authority to implement strategies without compromise or delay." After he hung up, Maya stared at her phone, troubled by the conversation and its implications. TechCore had identified her as the architect of Horizon's new strategy and was making a play to acquire her insights directly. It was both validating and deeply concerning. Further evidence that she had become viewed as a strategic asset rather than a professional. She was still processing the call when another came through, this time from Victor Reynolds. "Maya, we have a situation," he said without preamble. "Someone leaked details of our platform strategy to Business Tech. They're running a story tomorrow morning about our pivot and TechCore's response." Maya closed her eyes, absorbing this. New complication. How detailed is the leak? "Enough to give competitors a roadmap to our implementation plan. The board meeting has been moved up to 8 a.m. to address the crisis before markets open." The news hit like a physical blow. A detailed leak would accelerate competitive responses and potentially undermine Horizon's first-mover advantage. The timing, the night before the board meeting, suggested deliberate sabotage. "I'll be ready," Maya assured him, her mind already racing through implications and response strategies. After Reynolds hung up, Maya paced her apartment, connecting dots that suddenly formed a troubling pattern. TechCore's call. The leaked strategy details. The accelerated board meeting. The pressure on her to produce ever more accurate predictions. She had become the center of forces she hadn't fully anticipated. Not just market dynamics and competitive responses, but human factors like ambition, fear, and the desperate need for certainty in an uncertain world. As dawn broke over the city, Maya arrived at Horizon headquarters with a clarity that had emerged from her sleepless night. The narrative that had been building around her, the oracle, the savant, the strategic visionary, had created both opportunity and vulnerability. Reynolds had positioned her as Horizon's secret weapon, the key to their competitive advantage in a rapidly changing market. But weapons could be stolen, copied, or neutralized. If she allowed herself to be defined solely by her ability to see patterns others missed, she would remain valuable only as long as those predictions proved accurate, an impossible standard that no human could maintain indefinitely. The board members were already gathering in the main conference room when Maya arrived. Reynolds met her at the elevator, his expression tense with controlled panic. "The leak is worse than we thought," he said as they walked toward the conference room. TechCore has already announced plans to fast-track their competing platform. They're positioning it as more secure and better integrated with their existing products. Maya nodded, unsurprised by this development. "They're leveraging their size and market position to counter our innovation advantage. It's a predictable response." Reynolds stopped just short of the conference room, turning to face her. "The board is nervous, Maya. They're questioning whether we should continue investing in a strategy that competitors can simply copy and outspend us on." "They can copy the concept, but not the execution," Maya said with quiet confidence. "Our platform is months ahead in development, and we understand the integration challenges in ways they're just beginning to discover." Reynolds studied her with that now familiar intensity. "I need you to be absolutely convincing in there. The future of Horizon depends on it." As they entered the conference room, Maya felt the weight of expectation from every face that turned toward her. The board members knew her as the architect of Horizon's new strategy, the analyst whose insights had predicted a market shift that others had missed. Reynolds had positioned her as their competitive advantage, their oracle in a time of uncertainty. But as she prepared to present, Maya understood with sudden clarity that true leadership wasn't about infallible prediction or having all the answers. It was about seeing clearly when others were blinded by fear or complacency, about having the courage to chart a new course when the familiar path led nowhere. She had fought to be included in the strategy meeting because she saw what others couldn't, not because she had magical abilities, but because she had paid attention when others hadn't, because she had connected dots that others viewed as unrelated, because she had been willing to question assumptions that others took for granted. The leak had changed the competitive landscape, but it hadn't changed the fundamental truth that had driven Maya's strategy from the beginning. The future belonged to those who built bridges rather than walls, who created value through connection rather than isolation, who saw opportunity in collaboration rather than just in competition. As she began her presentation, Maya felt something shift inside her, a quiet confidence that had nothing to do with being right and everything to do with seeing clearly. The quiet analyst who had never been invited to the strategy meeting had found her voice, and it was a voice that would no longer be silenced or sidelined, regardless of what the board decided that morning. The boardroom fell silent as Maya concluded her presentation. She had not merely defended the strategy, she had transformed it, adapting to the leak with modifications that turned exposure into advantage. The tension that had filled the room when she began had gradually given way to something else, a quiet recognition that they were witnessing not just strategic thinking, but a form of leadership few had experienced before. "You're suggesting," said Elaine Vasquez, the most senior board member, "that we should respond to the leak not by accelerating our timeline or changing direction, but by opening parts of our platform architecture to create an industry standard. Maya nodded, standing confidently beside the projection screen where her revised strategy was displayed. Exactly. TechCore and others will try to create competing closed systems. By open sourcing certain components of our platform, we position ourselves as the center of an ecosystem rather than just another competitor. But doesn't that give away our advantage? Asked Michael Chen, another board member who had been skeptical from the start. It gives away the parts of our technology that would eventually be replicated anyway, Maya explained. But it keeps proprietary the elements that truly differentiate us: our integration algorithms, our security architecture, our user experience design. More importantly, it creates a standard that others will build upon, with us at the center. Reynolds, who had been uncharacteristically quiet during her presentation, finally spoke. This is a significant departure from our original strategy. You're suggesting we lead an industry transformation rather than just pivoting our own business model. Maya met his gaze directly. The leak changed the competitive landscape. We can either fight for territory in a crowded market or define the boundaries of an entirely new one. The board members exchanged glances, weighing the boldness of the proposal against the risks of such a fundamental shift. The silence stretched until Harold Martin, the board chairman, leaned forward. Ms. Patel, this strategy requires our competitors to follow our lead rather than simply copying our approach. What makes you confident they will? It was the question Maya had been anticipating, the one that went to the heart of strategic leadership versus oracle-like prediction. Her answer would determine whether the board saw her as a visionary or merely as Reynolds had positioned her, a savant whose cognitive differences produced valuable but possibly unreliable insights. I'm confident because I understand their incentives, she replied. TechCore and others have invested billions in products that customers now want to integrate across platforms. If we establish an open standard that makes those products more valuable to customers, their financial interest lies in compatibility rather than resistance. She moved to the whiteboard, drawing a diagram that illustrated the network effects of her proposed approach. Each company that adopts our standards increases the value of our platform to all users. The more companies that join, the more valuable participation becomes, creating a positive feedback loop that benefits everyone, including our competitors. The simplicity and elegance of the model silenced further objections. Maya wasn't asking the board to trust her predictive abilities. She was showing them the economic logic that made her strategy compelling, regardless of who was implementing it. This isn't just a technical strategy, she continued. It's a recognition that the future belongs to companies that enable rather than restrict, that connect rather than divide. The winners in the next phase of market evolution will be those who create value through collaboration rather than isolation. Harold Martin studied her for a long moment, then turned to Reynolds. You said Ms. Patel developed the original strategy before anyone else recognized the market shift. How did she see what our entire strategic planning department missed? Reynolds hesitated, and Maya could see him weighing how much to reveal about her cognitive differences. Before he could answer, she stepped forward. I noticed patterns in customer support requests that indicated growing frustration with closed systems, she said. While our strategic planning focused on feature competition, I was tracking integration problems that customers were solving through inefficient workarounds. The opportunity wasn't in building better features, but in eliminating those workarounds. The explanation was true but incomplete. It didn't reveal the way her mind formed connections others missed, the way her accident had rewired neural pathways to create a form of pattern recognition that went beyond normal analysis. But it framed her insight as professional observation, rather than savant-like ability, as leadership rather than oracle-like prediction. Martin nodded slowly, seeming to accept her explanation. And now you're suggesting that rather than fighting the leak, we should embrace transparency as a competitive advantage. Yes, Our competitors are expecting us to retreat, to protect what remains of our proprietary approach. By opening parts of our architecture instead, we change the game entirely. We move from a product competition to a platform competition, where our head start and vision give us significant advantages. The board discussion that followed was vigorous but increasingly supportive. Maya answered questions with a clarity and confidence that gradually transformed skepticism into cautious enthusiasm. By the time Martin called for a vote, the outcome seemed inevitable. "The board approves the revised strategy," Martin announced. "Mr. Reynolds, you and Ms. Patel have our authorization to implement the open platform approach immediately. We'll reconvene in 30 days to assess market response." As the board members filed out, several paused to congratulate Maya personally, a level of recognition that would have been unimaginable weeks earlier, when she was just another analyst, working in isolation. Reynolds remained behind, his expression unreadable as he gathered his materials. "That was not the strategy we discussed," he said when they were alone. "The leak required adaptation," Maya replied. "Opening our architecture creates advantages that outweigh the risks." Reynolds studied her with narrowed eyes. "You developed this revised approach overnight?" "I've been considering contingency scenarios since we began implementation. The leak activated one of those scenarios." "You anticipated even this," Reynolds said, his tone somewhere between admiration and suspicion. "A deliberate leak of our strategy the night before a crucial board meeting." Maya chose her next words carefully. "I considered various challenges we might face and prepared responses." "That's strategic planning, not prophecy." Reynolds seemed about to say more, but was interrupted by a call from Horizon's PR director, who needed guidance on responding to media inquiries about the leak. As he left to handle the crisis, Maya remained in the boardroom, the weight of what had just transpired settling around her. She had entered as Reynolds' strategic asset, positioned as the oracle whose insights would save Horizon. She had left as a leader in her own right, someone who had guided the board through a crucial strategic pivot with logic and vision, rather than mysterious predictive abilities. The distinction mattered not just for how others perceived her, but for how she understood herself and her role at Horizon. The cognitive differences that had emerged after her accident were real, but they were tools rather than her identity, advantages rather than magical powers. Maya returned to her office to find her team waiting anxiously for news of the board's decision. Their expressions brightened at the confidence in her stride. "The board approved," she announced, "but with a significant modification. We're opening parts of our architecture to create an industry standard." The announcement was met with momentary silence, then a barrage of questions about implementation challenges and competitive implications. Maya addressed each concern with the same clarity she had shown the board, gradually bringing her team to understand the logic and potential of the revised strategy. "This changes everything," Raj said when she had finished. "We're not just pivoting our business model, we're trying to transform the entire industry." "Yes," Maya agreed. "And that means our work becomes even more important. We're not just building a product anymore, we're creating a platform that others will build upon." As the team dispersed to begin implementing the revised strategy, Elena lingered behind. "You knew this would happen, didn't you?" she asked quietly. "Not just the board approval, but the leak, the way our competitors responded, you saw it all coming." Maya considered how to answer, how to explain her thought process without reinforcing the oracle narrative that Reynolds had created. Around her, "I didn't know with certainty," she said carefully, "but I considered various scenarios and prepared responses for each. The leak was a predictable risk given how many people were involved in the implementation." Elena studied her with a mixture of admiration and curiosity. "It's more than that, though. You see connections that others miss. You anticipate moves that no one else considers. It's like you're playing a different game than everyone else." "Not a different game," Maya corrected gently. Just with a broader perspective. I've learned to look beyond immediate, technical challenges to the human and organizational factors that drive strategic decisions. The explanation seemed to satisfy Alina, who nodded and returned to her work. But the conversation lingered in Maya's mind as she turned her attention to the implementation challenges ahead. Reynolds had positioned her as Horizon's oracle, someone whose cognitive differences produced valuable but potentially mystical insights. The narrative had served his purposes, giving the board confidence in a radical strategy, by suggesting it came from someone with special predictive abilities. But that narrative created expectations that no human could consistently meet, dependencies that would ultimately prove dangerous for both Maya and Horizon. More importantly, it diminished what she had actually accomplished, the years of careful observation, the disciplined analysis, the courage to challenge assumptions when everyone else accepted them as truth. The next weeks passed in a blur of implementation challenges and competitive responses. As Maya had predicted, TechCore initially positioned their platform as a secure alternative to Horizon's reckless open approach. But when major customers began adopting Horizon's standards, TechCore faced increasing pressure to ensure compatibility. 3 weeks after the board meeting, David Chun of TechCore requested another conversation with Maya, this time through official channels. Reynolds insisted on joining the call, clearly concerned about what his strategic asset might reveal to their primary competitor. Miss Patel, Mr. Reynolds, Chun began when the video conference connected. Thank you for agreeing to this discussion. TechCore has been monitoring the market response to your open architecture initiative with great interest. We've been pleased with the adoption rate, Reynolds replied, his tone carefully neutral. Several major enterprise customers have already integrated their systems using our standards. Chun nodded, his expression professionally cordial, but with an underlying tension. That's precisely what I wanted to discuss. Our customers are asking for compatibility with your standards. They've made it clear that they value integration across platforms more than the specific features of individual products. Maya exchanged a glance with Reynolds, seeing the realization dawn in his expression. This was exactly the scenario she had outlined to the board, competitors finding it in their financial interest to adopt Horizon standards rather than fighting to establish their own. We designed our architecture to be inclusive, Maya said. Any company that values their customers' need for integration should find our standards straightforward to implement. Chun's smile tightened slightly. That's a diplomatic way of saying, you've created a situation where we have little choice but to follow your lead or risk losing customers. It's a recognition that the market has changed, Maya corrected. Customers no longer want to be locked into closed ecosystems. They want the freedom to choose the best tools for specific functions and have them work seamlessly together. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Chun probing for details about Horizon's long-term strategy while offering limited insights into TechCore's plans. By the end, it was clear that TechCore was preparing to announce compatibility with Horizon standards, a major victory for Maya's strategy. After the call ended, Reynolds leaned back in his chair, studying Maya with new appreciation. You created a situation where our largest competitor has no choice but to adopt our standards, effectively following our lead rather than competing directly. Maya nodded. It's game theory applied to market dynamics. When integration becomes more valuable to customers than exclusive features, even dominant players must adapt or risk obsolescence. Reynolds was silent for a moment, then spoke in a more reflective tone than Maya had ever heard from him. When you first presented your strategy to the leadership team, I saw it as a clever pivot that might save Horizon from declining relevance. But this is something else entirely. You're reshaping the competitive landscape of an entire industry. The recognition should have felt validating, but Maya sensed something beneath Reynolds' praise, a recalibration of how he understood her role and value to Horizon. The strategy works because it aligns with where the market was already heading, she said carefully. I didn't create the customer demand for integration. I just recognized it before others did and developed a response that positioned us to lead rather than follow. Reynolds nodded slowly. You're being modest, Maya. What you've accomplished here goes beyond good strategy. You've demonstrated a form of leadership that transforms organizations and markets. The conversation marked a subtle but significant shift in their professional relationship. Reynolds had begun to see Maya not just as a strategic asset with unusual cognitive abilities, but as a leader whose vision and execution were reshaping Horizon's future. The 30-day board review became a celebration rather than an examination. Horizon's stock had risen 15% as investors recognized the potential of their new strategic direction. Major enterprise customers were migrating to their platform at rates exceeding projections. Most significantly, 3 of their largest competitors, including TechCore, had announced compatibility with Horizon's open standards, Ms. Patel. Harold Martin said as the review concluded, "The board wishes to formally recognize your contributions to Horizon's transformation. Mr. Reynolds has recommended that you be appointed Chief Strategy Officer with a seat on the executive leadership team. We have unanimously approved this recommendation." The announcement caught Maya by surprise. She had expected recognition, but not elevation to the C-suite, not a formal acknowledgement that her strategic vision should help guide Horizon's future beyond the current initiative. "Thank you, Mr. Martin," she said, gathering her thoughts. "I'm honored by the board's confidence and look forward to helping shape Horizon's continued evolution." As the board members offered congratulations, Maya noticed Sarah Chun watching from the back of the room, her expression conveying both pride and a hint of concern. Sarah had been Maya's strongest advocate when no one else recognized her potential, and she remained the person most attuned to the pressures Maya faced as her role expanded. Later that afternoon, Sarah stopped by Maya's office, still the glass-walled space on the executive floor, but soon to be replaced by something more befitting a C-suite executive. "Chief Strategy Officer," Sarah said, settling into a visitor chair. "Quite a journey from the analyst whose reports couldn't get past the department review committee." Maya smiled, the irony not lost on her. "A journey that wouldn't have been possible without your support. You were the only one who saw potential in my early analyses." "I saw someone who thought differently," Sarah corrected, "who questioned assumptions others took for granted. The scale of what you've accomplished since then that I never anticipated." There was something in Sarah's tone that prompted Maya to look more closely at her former supervisor. "You're concerned about something." Sarah hesitated, then nodded. "Reynolds has stopped talking about your unique cognitive abilities since the board meeting. He's positioning you differently now, as a visionary leader rather than a strategic oracle." "That's a positive development," Maya observed. "More accurate and less pressure to maintain impossible expectations." "Yes, but it also means he sees you differently, as a potential rival rather than just an asset." Sarah leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Reynolds built his reputation on being the visionary who drives Horizon's strategy. Now the board and the market are crediting you with the insights that are transforming the company." The observation crystallized concerns that had been forming in Maya's mind since the board meeting. Reynolds had championed her promotion, but his enthusiasm had seemed calculated rather than genuine. A recognition that her rising profile within the company made her too visible to remain in a subordinate role. "I'm not interested in corporate politics," Maya said. "I just want to implement strategies that help Horizon succeed." Sarah smiled sadly. "Politics isn't interested in your interest, Maya. It finds you whether you seek it or not. Just be careful. Reynolds doesn't share power easily, and he's invested years building relationships with the board that you're just beginning to develop." The warning stayed with Maya as she assembled her strategy team in their dedicated Conference room the following morning. The promotion had formalized her leadership, but these were the people who had helped transform her vision into reality, who had compressed months of work into weeks when necessary, who had believed in the strategy when it existed only in her notebook. As of yesterday, I'm officially Chief Strategy Officer, she announced. But this team remains the engine of Horizon's strategic transformation. I want each of you to know that your contributions have been essential to what we've accomplished. Does this mean we get fancy titles too? Raj asked with a grin that didn't quite hide his genuine question about what her promotion meant for the team. It means you'll all be recognized appropriately, Maya assured them. I've recommended promotions and equity grants for everyone on this team, based on your specific contributions to the platform strategy. The announcement was met with expressions of surprise and gratitude, tangible recognition that had been rare at Horizon before Maya's rise to leadership. More importantly, she continued, we're expanding the team's mandate beyond the current initiative. As CSO, I'll be responsible for identifying future strategic opportunities across all of Horizon's business units. I want this team at the center of that work. As they discussed the implications of this expanded role, Maya observed the dynamics within her team with new awareness. Raj had emerged as a natural communicator, translating complex technical concepts for business audiences. Elena's engineering brilliance provided the foundation for transforming strategic concepts into functional systems. Priya's data science expertise revealed patterns in user behavior that continually refined the platform's functionality. They complemented each other's strengths and compensated for weaknesses, a team that functioned as more than the sum of its individual talents. It struck Maya that this was the essence of effective leadership, not having all the answers yourself, but creating the conditions where collective intelligence could flourish. The insight represented a final evolution in how Maya understood her role at Horizon. She had begun as an analyst working in isolation, seeing patterns others missed, but struggling to have her insights recognized. Reynolds had positioned her as an oracle whose cognitive differences produced valuable predictions, a narrative that created unsustainable expectations and reduced her to a strategic asset rather than a complete professional. Now she was emerging as a leader whose value lay not just in her individual insights, but in her ability to build and guide teams that transformed those insights into organizational action. Her cognitive differences remained an advantage, but they were tools rather than her identity, assets that enhanced her leadership rather than defining it. This understanding crystallized further in the weeks that followed. As Chief Strategy Officer, Maya found herself balancing the technical details of platform implementation with broader questions about Horizon's future direction. She was no longer just the architect of a specific strategy, but a voice helping to shape the company's overall vision. The role brought new challenges that went beyond pattern recognition or strategic insight. Maya found herself navigating complex stakeholder relationships, balancing competing priorities, and communicating complex concepts to audiences with varying levels of technical understanding. Reynolds remained a complex figure in this new landscape, publicly supportive of Maya's elevation, but privately protective of his authority as CTO. Their interactions took on a careful formality, each recognizing the other's importance to Horizon's success while establishing boundaries around their respective domains. 3 months after her promotion, Maya stood at the podium of the industry's largest technology conference, preparing to deliver the keynote address that would formally introduce Horizon's open platform strategy to the broader market. The audience included executives from every major technology company, industry analysts, financial investors, and technology journalists, all eager to understand the strategy that had transformed Horizon from a struggling mid-tier player to an industry innovator. As she surveyed the packed auditorium, Maya reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the analyst working alone with patterns only she could see, to the strategist fighting to be heard, to the leader whose vision was reshaping an industry. Each phase had required different skills and overcome different challenges. 3 years ago, she began, her voice steady and clear in the hushed auditorium. I noticed a pattern in customer support requests that revealed a fundamental truth about our industry. While we were competing to build better individual products, our customers were struggling to make those products work together effectively. The simplicity of this observation belied the complexity of the insight it had triggered, the recognition that the next competitive frontier wasn't features but integration, not products but platforms. Today, Horizon is introducing an open architecture standard that transforms how enterprise software systems interact. We're moving from a world of isolated excellence to one of collaborative innovation, where the value of individual products is multiplied by their ability to work seamlessly with others. As she outlined the technical details and business implications of Horizon's strategy, Maya could see understanding dawning in the expressions of audience members, the recognition that this approach fundamentally changed competitive dynamics that had defined the industry for decades. The future belongs not to those who build walls around their innovations, she concluded, but to those who create bridges between them. Not to those who force customers to choose, but to those who empower them to connect. Not to those who see only competition, but to those who recognize that in an interconnected world, creating value through collaboration is the ultimate competitive advantage. The standing ovation that followed represented more than appreciation for a well-delivered keynote. It was recognition that Maya Patel, once the analyst who wasn't invited to strategy meetings, had articulated a vision that would reshape how an entire industry understood value creation in the digital age. As she left the stage, Maya caught sight of Victor Reynolds watching from the wings, his expression a complex mixture of pride and calculation. He had recognized her potential when others hadn't, had given her the platform to implement her strategy when it mattered most. But he had also tried to define her by her cognitive differences, to position her as an oracle rather than a leader, to make her value dependent on prediction rather than vision. Impressive, he said as she joined him backstage. You've given voice to a strategy that's already transforming our industry. Our strategy, Maya corrected gently. Horizon strategy. The one we're implementing together. Reynolds nodded, acknowledging the diplomatic response. The board is already talking about what comes next, how we build on this success.